recidivism as it relates to bail reform. There isn't a comparison from 2019, but a bunch of data was just released with a sort of a drop-down flow chart. And if so, what did you take from that data or the Times Union article if you had a chance to look at it?
Well, the data that I saw was that we know that there's about 3,500 additional victims as a result of cashless bail. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've stood on the Senate floor and I've heard when we pass any bill, sometimes really bad bills, they'll say, if this just saves one life, it's worth it. Well, we just caused 3,500 new victims. So I don't want to hear, they may think that's a statistical insignificance for the proponents of cashless bail. I don't think it's a insignificance, statistical or otherwise. And I'm sure if you talk to the 3,500 families of those victims, they would agree with that. So that was my big takeaway, was that there's no doubt this has created more victims. The goal of every legislator, every elected official, should never be to create more victims. Is that like a price that we're paying to be more socially just or more woke, that, well, you got to break a few eggs if you're going to make an omelet? I don't look at it that way. Maybe they do, but this conference doesn't. So that was my takeaway from some of that data that I saw. I will admit, I have not done a deep dive on all the crosstabs and all the different aspects, but I did read the article.
That being said, what are you expecting to hear during today's speech, and what would you hope to hear? I don't know
if they're the same. Yeah, we'll be available. I obviously will. I get a front row seat to the speech, and so I don't know if what I hope to hear is what I will hear. We'll see. Hopefully, there's something in there about being open to changes on bail, on judicial discretion. Hopefully, there's some information or some positive things in there about how we're going to lower energy costs in the state of New York, how we're going to keep people here. The governor once represented my region of the state, a rural area. Hopefully there's going to be talk about helping our farms who are facing a very gargantuan decision this month. Hopefully she'll just say it's not going to happen. So I want to hear, issues like that: farmers, public safety, economic, the economy. When is the pandemic going to end? Meaning, when is our approach to this going to end? I think that's a real concern now as we're in the Omicron post-holiday surge, but I think there's a lot of hope that as we move in to the late winter, spring, we're going to be out of this. The question is, when electorally, when governmentally, when politically are we going to be out of this? When are we going to start to have leaders talk less in terms of fear and more in terms of keeping people calm and sort of talking about it? Even the other day you heard the governor sort of mention hospitalization rate. She started to question, we use these hospitalization numbers as sort of the be-all metric. Now she starts to say, well, maybe those people really aren't there for COVID. Maybe they went there for a broken arm and they were tested, because they have to be, and they had the sniffles. These are things that our conference has been saying for months. So, that's why, that's where this conference stands. So hopefully we'll hear things like that. She has been a little bit less, she has teased less of her speech than her predecessor used to. She did talk about term limits. This conference has supported term limits every year I've been here. We've pushed. Senator Griffo, who couldn't be here today, has sponsored a bill that would introduce term limits since he's been in the state Senate. This conference will continue to support those. My colleagues across the aisle, I don't know where they stand on that. And we'll see, because we, of course, as you know, have to pass it through the legislature 2 successive times for it to mean anything. So she can put it in the speech, that's great, but let's see if there's any push or heft behind it.
Senator, do you think that the term limit proposal should apply to members of the legislature as well?
I've always supported it across the board. I think that there was always a question about what is the right term for a legislator versus an executive. They serve 4 years, so maybe 2 terms, whereas a legislator might be 12 years or might be a different number. So I think those details, different people can agree on or disagree on those details. But yes, I support term limits across the electorate spectrum.
We're back here today with the public allowed into the building but not up on the first floor. Is that a good solution, or should we be doing something different?
I'm going to get to that. I do want to add one thing, John. I always remind people, though, too, I can be term limited at any time. Every 2 years, I can be term limited by the people I represent. So I always tell constituents, you can term limit me anytime you want if you really got me doing a lousy job. So, Bill, to your question, I was very upset, and I am upset, that I get last night, when I'm at dinner with some of my colleagues, notification, and that the public was who made treks down here, people who left their jobs for the day, as they are wont to do and they are protected to do, to come down here and have a rally, talk to their elected leaders. We find out last night, 18 hours before today or before the event, that all of a sudden you got to have a vaccination card or proof of vaccination or a negative test. And there's also going to be a limit capacity on limits. I think that the idea that the governor would not have foreseen that she would have to put these policies in place is a joke. It was intentional. It was left to be done at the last minute so people would not be able to make the proper arrangements so they would have access to the building. I mean, I had even my staff held up this morning who work here. It's a complete cluster, and I'll just leave you to fill in the blank. And it really is just disappointing to me. She's been the governor for several months. This should be an easy logistical thing to be able to address in advance. If those were the rules she wanted to do, that's fine. Put them out in advance, and then the public and the members and the staff would all know. We had to have reporters brought in here today because they couldn't get through security. So it really is not the best look as far as efficiency, transparency, or anything else as far as that goes.
Senator, what do you make of the redistricting process so far, and what would you like to see from the legislature going forward?
Well, I'm about as disappointed as I am with the last question on redistricting. Look, here's the truth. This was a new process that was set up many years ago. The idea was to take some of the partisanship out of the process by which we get maps. Unfortunately, and I really mean that sincerely, it does not appear the IRC has been able to do the job, whether they were unwilling or unable to do the job that they were created to do, and that our conference expected them to do, which was to create one map that had some kind of consensus from both sides. There's no doubt that my colleagues across the aisle and Nancy Pelosi and her allies in Washington, D.C., whose majority hinges on some of these redistricting maps, they want partisan maps for New York State. What I will tell you is that this conference is focused on issues that matter to New Yorkers, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's the economy, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's our farmers, whatever the issue might be. I know this conference is on the right side of those issues that matter most to New Yorkers right now. And no matter what they try to draw, they can't run from their record the past several years, and we will be running competitive races across this state come the spring, the summer, and into November. And I think we're going to have a great November, no matter what map they try to draw, no matter how gerrymandering or partisan they make the map, no matter how much they want to not listen to the will of the voters. You saw what happened with Proposition 1, and what happens a few weeks later, the governor signs a bill actually thumbing her nose at the will of the voters. So when they talk about listening to the voters, they're full of it. They're absolutely full of it. They listen to their voters, I guess, maybe some of them, because the voters overwhelmingly defeated those ballot propositions. Overwhelmingly. Wasn't by a little, wasn't close, it was overwhelming. And yet they seem intent on dismissing the will of the voters on that, and obviously dismissing the will of the voters, because don't forget the voters created the IRC. That was created by the voters. They wanted to pick their politicians, not politicians to pick their voters. And it seems like my colleagues across the aisle, for all their bluster over the years, are going to go right down the partisan map drawing road. But we'll see where that goes. Our conference will be ready, whatever comes out of it.
Last question, Senator, which of the issues that you discussed today do you think have discussed any of the majority, or do you think have the greatest chance of getting some support? Because obviously we need that.
Sure. Yeah, obviously today's the first day, so no, we will have these discussions. I'm not going to pretend the majority. I mean, there's two things going on when it comes to criminal justice or the cashless bail situation. So you had one of their members who ran for district attorney and literally took down the whole ticket because he was the author of bail reform. That's a fact. That's undeniable. The former county executive of Nassau County said as much. Then you have members in their own conference from the city and other parts that are saying, we're not going to touch bail. So they're going to have to make a decision. Do they care more about those who are career criminals and who can, go in the revolving door, or do they care more about, their colleagues who represent areas where this is clearly not popular and the results of it are clearly not popular? So that's an issue internally they have to tackle with. Our position is very clear and has been clear from day one. Everything we said would happen has happened. So our position hasn't changed. Obviously, we welcome changes in dialogue around the issue, and there are some mayors and DAs that have, and police commissioners that have said as much. Whether they listen to them will be a question I think New Yorkers should pay attention to and will pay attention to as the year goes on. Thanks, guys.